Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I know this is a bit delayed, but today we are finally going to delve into Starkid's newest musical, Nerdy Prudes Must Die. I've also already done a video with my immediate thoughts if you want to watch that, but this will be a full in-depth review. There will be spoilers, but I'll keep the beginning section spoiler-free if you still haven't watched the show. It's free on YouTube, so you can always go and watch it now and come back when you're done. Nerdy Prudes Must Die is Starkid's latest full-length stage musical, and the third entry into the Hatchetfield trilogy, following up The Guy Who Didn't Like Musicals and Black Friday. It's not a direct sequel, but does take place in the Hatchetfield universe with a few of the same characters. It was originally performed in February 2023 in Los Angeles and released on YouTube in October. The plot follows our titular nerdy prudes, Stephanie Lauder, Pete Spankowski, Richie Lipschitz, Ruth Fleming, and Grace Chastity as they face off against the school bully and star football player Max Yeagerman. It's a horror comedy musical like the other Hatchetfield shows, although I think it leans more into the comedy aspect compared to Black Friday, which was more of a horror show with comedic elements. It's very much inspired by late 90s, early 2000s teen movies, both horror and comedy variations. It's a really fun show that I unsurprisingly recommend. Overall impressions, my initial reaction was definitely better than Black Friday, which I did also enjoy, but I felt had to grow on me over time. Whereas with this show, I had a more immediate positive reaction. I initially watched it with the digital ticket, which did not have all the polished filmed elements of the YouTube version, but I enjoyed nonetheless. I really enjoyed the music, the story, the characters, which I'll go more in depth about in a minute, but I also really think it showed just how much Starkid has grown over the years. This show came off as very professional, and it's wild to compare their early days as students making these shows for fun versus now the level of production and commitment are off the charts. I still love Starkid's early work, but the quality has improved so much in just about every area. I'd probably rank it in the top half of Starkid shows, higher than Black Friday, but maybe lower than The Guy Who Didn't Like Musicals. So next I want to talk about the performances in this show. I want to give a shout out to our new Starkids that were introduced in Nerdy Prudes Must Die. The first is Will Branner, who plays Max. He's brand new to Starkid. This is his very first project with them of any kind. He went to the University of Michigan like many other Starkid members, and he's currently in the Back to the Future musical on Broadway. He was absolutely fantastic in this role, just perfectly cast. I want to note that because of delays in this production, some of these roles were originally going to be played by other actors. I don't know all the details of that, but I have heard that Jeff was going to be Max, but he ended up not performing due to other commitments. So just a little clarification, I found this TikTok showing a live stream from Jeff that I'll link in the description, but he says that the part wasn't directly written only for him, but that he was probably in the talks to play that role and was likely going to do it until they found Will and some other things happened. So it's not 100% true that he was definitely going to play Max, but he was the most likely person up until closer to the show when they cast Will instead. But I think it worked out really well in this case. Will brought his own unique take to this role, and he fit it physically and vocally in a way that I'm not sure Jeff would have. Especially with his height, he definitely works as that stereotypical jock character, and he can also be very menacing when the role calls for it. He has some amazing, hilarious line deliveries. The one most people are obsessed with is this one.
Oh fuck! I didn't think there'd be a skeleton here! I'm so fucking scared of skeletons!
Which is great, but my favorite is probably this joke.
I love Jesus. Me too!
Just the look on his face made me cry laughing. A+ job, and welcome to Starkid. Next, we have Bryce Charles, who has appeared in some Nightmare Time episodes, but this is her first appearance in a Starkid stage show. She didn't have a lead, but she appeared in a couple of smaller roles, like one of the cheerleaders and a detective. Despite these smaller parts, she definitely stood out, especially in some of her singing solos. She did a great job, and I'd love to see her back for some bigger roles in the future. And last, I want to shout out the two understudies who covered this show, Virginia Vass and Davis Hamilton. They didn't appear in any main roles in the YouTube version, but they did have cameos. Understudies are super important in the theater world, especially nowadays. And in a situation like this, they pretty much have to know the whole show back and forth. In the past, Starkid has had issues with cast members getting sick and having to go as far as canceling full performances, so it's great that they're hiring understudies now. As for other performances, for me, the standout was definitely Angela as Grace Chastity. If you didn't know, Angela joined Smosh in 2022, so we've gotten to see her do a lot more variety of characters between Black Friday and Nerdy Prudes Must Die. And now, seeing her as Grace, it's clear just how suited to her this role is with her specific comedic abilities. I liked her performance as Lex, but it's more something I could see a number of actresses playing, whereas with Grace, she really owns the role and makes it her own. She's really great at doing these over-the-top intense characters, and she really got to show off her skills with this show, especially at the end. I was really surprised by the chemistry that Joey and Mariah had as Steph and Pete. They're not the first two I would think to pair together as romantic leads, but they worked really well, both acting-wise and vocally. It seems like Richie might be the fan favorite, based on what I've seen on social media, which I definitely understand. It's nice to see John play roles roles that are really far from Paul, who is a much more straight-laced and controlled character. He also has great comedic timing, and I'm glad he gets to show off a different side of his skills. And without giving any spoilers away, the role he gets to play towards the end is also a really nice surprise. Lauren did great as always, although I wasn't quite as big of a fan of her character as some of the others. Corey had a smaller role in the show, but he also did very well. I think he's really great at playing those menacing types of characters, although I do also like to see his comedic characters as well. Kim and Kurt also had a couple of smaller roles, my favorite of course being Grace's parents. The whole dinner scene was just hilarious, and it's also really funny to see them playing a couple if you don't know they're married in real life, so that's just a kind of fun Easter egg. Now onto the music. I really love the music for this show. Every song was a banger with one exception. I know this will get some disagreement because a lot of people really like this song, but I'm not a big fan of Cool As I Think I Am. It was kind of just boring to me, not horrible or anything, but I don't have any desire to go back and listen to it on its own. It was too slow and also had some issues with one of my biggest problems with Jeff's music overall. I think he's vastly improved on it over the years, but he does have a tendency to write some very clunky lyrics that don't make a lot of sense. It's honestly mostly gone with this show, but the lyric,
"What if my beliefs were taller?"
stood out to me in a negative way. Maybe because the song is slower, it's easier to understand and therefore way more obvious when something doesn't make logical sense like that. I will say that I liked the song a lot better when they brought it back as a reprise. It seemed like they kept the best parts of it, and the slower pace worked a lot better at that part of the show and combined with If I Loved You. My second least favorite song I had an interesting reaction to, which is Best of You. It's a pop punk style song which worked for the 2000s inspiration, but is also very similar to some other kind of cheesy teen musical songs like I See Stars from Mean Girls the musical or Tonight Belongs to Us from The Prom, which struck me as sort of an odd and upbeat ending for a Hatchetfield show, and I definitely saw some other people confused about it in the live chat when it premiered on YouTube. But after watching the full show and seeing the song that comes after it, it definitely works better in retrospect. My favorite song was probably Hatchettown. The lyrics were clever, the harmonies were great. I think the show overall had some of the tightest harmonies in any Starkid show, up there with Firebringer. I feel like this type of song is a staple in Hatchetfield shows where you know that everything is really going to shit, and it always works so well. I also read pretty recently a comment on a YouTube video that struck me where someone said that Kim has replaced Jeff's falsetto, and I hadn't thought of it like that, but when you listen to this song in particular, it does make sense the way that her voice works in the ensemble. Personally, I've had problems with Jeff overdoing the falsetto in certain songs and it becoming distracting. I think Kim's high notes are much more clear and blend a lot better.
And down, 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 down. You never should settle for a lifetime that is handed to you. There's always a line to be caught and someone to bear through.
Minor spoilers ahead, I won't give details, but it's a little bit more spoilery. Objectively, the best song is probably The Summoning, which I'm sure many of you will agree with. Starkid always has amazing villain songs, and this is no exception. The first time I watched that song, it was absolutely mind-blowing. It's genuinely really eerie to watch, but also fit well with the overall aesthetic of the show and the Hatchetfield universe in general. Like I said before, Jeff has gotten a lot better at being concise with his lyrics and getting his point across in less words, and this song really showed that off. It was so clear in its intent and its execution. It just overall worked really well. The backing music, the score to this show, was also excellent. There's a lot of motifs from other Hatchetfield shows. The one I noticed most was the Show Me Your Jazz Hands theme, I'll call it.
Calling all units, putting out an APB on one Grace Chastity.
But there was a bunch of other ones as well. I think this works so well because it functions both as an Easter egg, a callback if you're familiar with the other Hatchetfield projects, but it also stands on its own as just a regular musical motif. It's a very clever way to tie things together that we don't usually get to see in musicals, since unlike movies, they don't typically have sequels. The choreography was, to me, one of the weaker aspects of this show. It wasn't bad or anything, it just didn't stand out like some of the other Starkid shows have. I think with the exception of A Very Part of Senior Year, which barely had any dancing, every Starkid show has had at least one number that really went above and beyond with its choreography. But Nerdy Prudes didn't have any that stood out to me like that. There are certainly songs that were solid with their choreo, but nothing super memorable. My favorite was probably the second part of Literal Monster. It was very creative, and the usage of those touchdown dances was really fun and a great character moment for Max. The rest of the songs came off as very standard to me. Lauren choreographed the show, and I think if you've seen Spies Are Forever, which she also choreographed, you can see the similarities. I think another part of why the choreography didn't stand out as much is also that they're missing some of what I'll call their star dancers besides Lauren, especially without James and Jeff. I'm not exactly sure the skill level of Bryce and Will since they didn't really get to do any special choreo in the show, but at least from what I could see, the moves were a bit more standardized for everyone rather than having any spotlight moments for the stronger dancers in the cast. Warning, from here on out there will be explicit spoilers, so if you haven't seen the show, come back when you've finished. The costumes in this show, following from the Black Friday costumes, which I also liked, were really solid. I loved how it both fit the vibe of an early 2000s movie with more modern clothing as well. Richie's costume was really great. I definitely definitely know some people who dress like that IRL. I mean, I kind of dressed like that if you replace anime with Star Wars. Grace's costumes were probably my favorite. It was really funny to me that she dressed simultaneously kind of like an old lady, but also very childish, which is just perfect for her character, who is both very old-fashioned with some of her beliefs and also extremely immature. The only thing is, I do picture someone who is that religious in a long skirt rather than pants, but I understand for movement and choreography that probably wouldn't work as well. One of the great things about the YouTube version is that you could see a lot of the details in the costumes and makeup that weren't as visible in the digital ticket. Max's costume when he comes back from the dead is a perfect example. It's a take on his original football look, but it's all torn up and also very glittery. It looks super cool and very theatrical, while the FX makeup they did on him also makes it look creepy enough for the horror elements of the show. Another highlight was absolutely the Lords in Black costumes. Every single one was phenomenal. They each had their own individual personalities that immediately stood out from the costuming, but also worked really well together. Even if you don't know the characters from other Starkid projects, they did a really good job of establishing them quickly with the help of the costumes. The wiggly backpack on John was a really nice touch. My personal favorite was Kim as Nibley. I just love the vibes. The costumes did a really great job of tying everything together. Let's talk sets. They were pretty solid, if a bit simple. There weren't a ton of set changes besides things like desks and tables, but the small things they did definitely did give a good sense of location. I like that the background with all the Nighthawks messages worked well with both the Act 1 Bully Max and the later Undead Max. There wasn't as much creative usage of the stage as there were in certain parts of Black Friday, but I still think they used this space well. Now onto the really spoiler heavy stuff. We're going to discuss plot and characters. The show was very well written. It was hilarious, of course, which is not a surprise coming from Starkid, but there were definitely some gut-busting moments.
Am I reading as Ghost or Lin-Manuel Miranda?
The characters all worked very well. I'll get into some comparisons to Black Friday soon, but overall, the individual story arcs were a lot better integrated into the wider plot, which is great. There were also some really great character introductions. I like that they didn't include Max at all in the opening number. It made his intro way more powerful. It's also very clever and a testament to the writing that they opened up the show with Ruth and Richie singing I'm Dead and showing a sneak peek at the later murders, but it still took me by surprise when they were actually killed. It seems like it might be a spoiler, similar to the opening of Guy Who Didn't Like Musicals where they're all singing, but they did such a great job at getting you into the story with the kids trying to take down Max and building up their relationships that it didn't ruin anything. The build up to all the separate plot points, going to the Whalen house, Max coming back, all the deaths, and eventually the summoning didn't feel rushed at all and tied together really well while still having their own room to breathe. This also gives the show very good rewatchability because one of the things with horror or mystery or anything like that with plot twists or surprises is that it can seem really interesting on a first watch, but if the lead up to the twist is weak, then there's no incentive to watch it again and it will just seem boring. But if you make all the other elements strong enough, then it's just as fun to watch a second time around. The integration of the supernatural elements was done really well too, where at the beginning I wasn't even sure if it would be supernatural at all or if it was just a regular slasher who's like a serial killer, but they built it up slowly, first with the hint of the Whalen house being haunted.
It's haunted. Everyone says so.
And that's why it'll never sell, Mother. Ghost stories.
That each time they introduced a new supernatural element, it didn't feel out of place at all, and by the time you got to the summoning, you're expecting something big like that. The ending might be one of my favorite of the Hatchetfield shows. All of them have done a really good job at pulling the rug out from under you, especially in Guy Who Didn't Like Musicals when Paul starts singing, but I think Grace pulling out the book had a really similar impact. It was very satisfying after Best of You. It's maybe not as scary as the Black Friday ending, which genuinely freaked me out. Even though world destruction is probably imminent again, it had a different tone, but it was still a great ending. Angela killed it, and I think she's really good at just going feral like that. I think my favorite character was Grace. Honestly, kind of a girl boss. Definitely got the most laughs out of me.
I am only one man's girl, Max, and his name is Jesus Christ.
All the characters are really solid, but she stood out a lot, had an interesting arc, and overall was the most memorable. She's interesting too in that she's a protagonist, but she's not really a hero. Nor is she the villain for most of the show at least, but she's mostly in it for herself, which is an interesting character type to put into an ensemble show like this. Max was a good character, a strong villain. I don't think I was quite as enamored with him as some people I've seen online be. He's like a hashtag problematic fave for a lot of people, but that went more to Grace for me. A lot of the smaller characters like the other high schoolers were great too. They did a similar thing in Black Friday with a lot of the shoppers where they gave them these little moments that helped make them seem real, even if they weren't fully fleshed out characters like the leads. It helped add texture to the Hatchetfield universe. One of the aspects of the show I'm still deciding on whether I like or not is the BBQ Monologues. In all the Hatchetfield musicals now, there's been an example of a show within a show. First with Workin' Boys, then Santa Claus is Coming to High School, which then becomes something of a meme within the fandom. They were clearly trying to do that again with BBQ Monologues. I'm just not sure if it worked as well. Firstly, I don't think anything will ever have quite the sticking power that Workin' Boys did, just because it was so novel at the time that you're never going to be able to replicate that. But I also feel like BBQ Monologues was a lot more disconnected to the overall show than the previous two examples. It felt a lot more out of place. And Lauren's song, well, I think it was good as its own thing and very well performed. It was pretty long, and with the slower pace and more serious tone, took me out of the show a bit more than the other two examples did. It might have worked better if it was a little shorter, if maybe she got cut off instead of singing the whole thing, but I'm really not sure. For both Ruth and Richie, their deaths come after they feel like they've found their place in the world. So I understand from a character perspective why they'd have her perform, but this particular song and fake musical might not have been the best choice. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. Did you think this worked as well as in the other Hatchetfield shows? Next, I want to talk about some criticisms for my Black Friday review that I think they directly improved on in this show. The first being the camera work. The camera work is super important for those of us who don't get to see the show live and is unique to the YouTube version versus the digital ticket. It can really affect the viewing experience and make you want to come back and watch again when it's well done. One big thing they improved on was the audio. While there was some echoey moments in the beginning, especially with Mariah, it seemed to resolve early on and certainly didn't have any of the major audio problems that Black Friday did. The camera work in general was really good. The direction, the editing, it flowed very naturally, and while it isn't the exact same thing as seeing it live, I think they chose good moments for close-ups and things like that enhance the experience for home viewers rather than distract the audience. And one thing that they improved on a lot that is not just a Starkid problem, but is something I see in a lot of professional recordings of musical theater is cutting off important choreography moments by focusing on only one person in an ensemble scene. Sometimes this is fine if it's brief, the camera's panning and everyone is doing the same thing, but a lot of the time it's done in a way where whole parts of the scene are just cut off, and they really didn't do that for the show. For every dance number, I could at least get a sense of what was going on with the choreography, even if I literally couldn't see every single person at the same time. They just didn't fully cut things off like they did in Black Friday and some other shows. It's also just wild to go back and watch some of the early shows and compare the quality. Some of that is just the availability of technology nowadays, but I think it also speaks to how professional they've become over the years and how much they've improved with each show. Another improvement over Black Friday was the scope of the show. I talk about this more in my Black Friday review, but adding the storyline in with the president brought things way too far out of Hatchetfield. It was too disconnected from the rest of the plot. They definitely overstuffed the cast in that show, and the president's storyline was the weakest link. In Nerdy Prudes Must Die, on the other hand, they used the mayor and the police as the outside force, which kept everything within Hatchetfield while still filling the same role that the federal government did in Black Friday. It kept things a lot more connected to the main plot within the high school, especially with Steph as the mayor's daughter, and it was a lot more cohesive and easier to follow. That also goes into how they balanced the characters. One of the biggest complaints about Black Friday was that I and many other people didn't feel as connected to the characters as I did with other Starkid shows. They weren't given enough time to develop. Nerdy Prudes was still more of an ensemble show, but the character deaths were a lot more impactful, and you got a lot more time to connect with the individual characters that you just didn't really get with Ethan and Hannah and Lex, for example. They also had very strong personalities from the beginning with great character introductions, which makes it a lot easier for the audience to get attached quickly, and their individual arcs were a lot better integrated with each other. It felt like we were following individual characters within a wider ensemble, whereas with Black Friday, it kind of felt like a bunch of completely separate stories going on at once. Along these lines, I love how they hinted at wider possibilities in the Hatchetfield universe with Mayor Lauder and what he said about the Black Book.
You do it!
No! I'm not touching that book ever again.
Without taking away from the current storyline or characterization. It gives room for future projects and this wider universe while still being a complete story on its own. One of the problems with Black Friday, especially after having watched more Nightmare Time episodes, is that Hannah and Lex's story in particular felt very incomplete, and that they were hinting at a lot of stuff that was later revealed in separate projects, but was very unfulfilling within the show. One huge thing that I think has been a learning experience for Starkid is the integration of Easter eggs into their live shows. That's not something you typically see in musicals, but because Starkid has this online fandom and a whole expanded Hatchetfield universe, it gives them a really unique opportunity to integrate elements from past shows. They did this a lot in Black Friday, sometimes to negative effect. Many of the moments, especially later on in the show, came off as jarring and didn't fit the more serious tone they were going for.
Wear a watch.
In Nerdy Prudes Must Die, they were a lot more strategic in where they placed the Easter eggs, so it wasn't as distracting from the middle of a scene or any emotionally heavy moments that would be undercut by a joke. And the filmed cameos in Hatchetown were also really smart. I know that if some of those characters randomly appeared in a live show, the applause and cheers and gasps would have been way too distracting for the middle of a song. Even Paul and Emma were placed at a really good point, where the tone was shifting but it hadn't fully gone dark, so it didn't seem inappropriate. By the very, very end of the show, there were no more references, for example in Dirty Dudes Must Die, which is very very different from there being quite a few in What If Tomorrow Comes. It seems like they really took into account the audience reactions and criticisms for the show, and I'm always glad to see them improve on things like that. So initially, I had a whole section talking about the social commentary aspects of the show, but ultimately, to cover it, I think it would just take way longer than I could fit in a simple review, and even require more research for me to fully form my thoughts, so I guess I'll save that for another time. Just to summarize though, I think Nerdy Prudes hinted at certain topics of social commentary regarding things like religion, bullying, misogyny, homophobia, but didn't follow through on them as well as they did in Black Friday or some of the Nightmare Time episodes like Abstinence Camp did. This is something I'd really love to hear your thoughts on, as I'm still forming my own opinion on how I think they handled these topics. I want to also comment on my past thoughts on what Nerdy Prudes Must Die would be. Also, what do I think about Nerdy Prudes Must Die? I know a lot of people have asked me. I don't know much about it. I know a lot of people have been talking about the connection of Grace Chastity, and then there's also Hot Chocolate Boy. Are they going to be, and now there's the Cineplex, Joey Cineplex character. The name Nerdy Prudes Must Die makes me think of more of like a 2000s kind of thing, like some kind of ridiculous, maybe like a slasher thing, or just kind of like, I don't know, like the Scream movies or something. I don't watch horror movies because I'm a wuss, but you know, something like that, just more like kind of ridiculous. Or maybe having to do with like high school. Like I think of like a 2000s like high school comedy. So maybe it'll be something like that. So I was right about a few things. Of course, Grace and Hot Chocolate Boy, who we now know as Pete, were significant characters. I was also right about the 2000s high school inspiration, although I think I was thinking more of a serial killer style slasher rather than anything supernatural. I also talked in that video about where they might go with Lex and Hannah's storyline, and a lot of that has been addressed directly in Nightmare Time. It's interesting to see how my expectations changed over time, since there was such a large gap between when Black Friday came out and when Nerdy Prudes came out. Let me know what you expected going in. On that note of the 2000s, I wanted to talk about some of the comparisons and inspiration for this musical that I noticed. All the Hatchetfield shows, although they're not parodies, definitely take a lot of inspiration from different horror movies and also other movies and musicals. I talked about it a bit in my Guy Who Didn't Like Musicals movie video, particularly with Invasion of the Body Snatchers and those types of older horror sci-fi movies. But I'm sure there are some in Black Friday too that I didn't recognize as someone who is way too scared to watch horror movies. Nerdy Prudes Must Die gets its most obvious inspiration from the late 90s, early 2000s teen movies, horror, but also regular comedies as well, and also expanding to other eras of teen movies. My immediate comparison was definitely to Carrie. There are a lot of parallels you could make, especially between Carrie and Grace Chastity. Another example is The Craft, which has a similarly revenge-focused plot. I also had a friend suggest Jennifer's Body, which I can definitely see the connections to, especially with the music in that movie and the pop-punk inspiration for some of Nerdy Prudes. Mean Girls is probably the most influential teen movie just in general, but also has a big presence in the Starkid fandom with the musical version, and has a lot of those similar themes of taking down the bully, so I can definitely see a lot of connections there. Those are all the ones I immediately thought of, but I'm sure there's others that I missed. Be sure to leave any connections or references that you caught in the comments. Also, if you're into that kind of stuff, I recommend the Kill Count video about the Guy Who Didn't Like Musicals. It points out a ton of references that I hadn't noticed, like to The Shining. One connection that's more of a funny coincidence than a reference is the movie Bottoms. It's funny, they clearly took a lot of the same inspiration from these 2000s teen movies, and they have a lot of similarities, while also being extremely different. So it was just a fun thing to see how that kind of collided. The last thing I want to touch on before I wrap this up is how this show fits in the greater Hatchetfield universe, and what the viewing experience is like depending on what other Hatchetfield things you've seen. When I watched the digital ticket, I had only seen a few episodes of Nightmare Time, including Abstinence Camp, but then I watched more of them before the YouTube premiere. From my perspective at least, I don't think it's that important to have seen Nightmare Time to enjoy this show. I think they did a good enough job at building up the characters and setting up the plot with the Lords in Black that it shouldn't be confusing if you don't know more of the lore. It definitely adds something to the experience if you have seen it, but it's not essential, which is a good thing, because not everyone is going to watch every single other project before they watch this one. This isn't Marvel. With that being said, I do think it might be strange to watch this show without having seen The Guy Who Didn't Like Musicals or Black Friday, especially not at least knowing about Wiggly. I can't imagine anyone watching this as their first Starkid show, especially not the type of people who watch my channel, but if there's anyone out there who has only seen Nerdy Prudes Must Die in the Hatchetfield trilogy, let me know. I'd be very interested to see if it makes as much sense as an introduction to that world as The Guy Who Didn't Like Musicals does. They've obviously expanded Hatchetfield so much with Nightmare Time, and there's a lot of questions that have been answered, and things that I'll call fixed points that explain a lot more about how some of these characters are connected and how they interact with each other in various timelines. There's almost infinite stories they could tell within Hatchetfield. They've set it up in a way to be sort of like the Twilight Zone, where the plots could be only vaguely connected to the rest of the universe, but they've also set up some more complex storylines that could lead to a much bigger plot, like with the Black Book. I'd be interested to see where those things go in Nightmare Time 3, if that's ever done, and possibly to see some of the new characters in Nerdy Prudes come back. And finally, on that note, what I hope for the next Starkid show. We know it's not going to be another Hatchetfield musical, but beyond that, it could be anything. I would love to see Corey in the lead role. He's had a lot of great parts, but never the lead, and I think he could do great. I doubt that they'll ever return to direct parodies, but I would be interested to see them continue playing on different genres like they've been doing with Hatchetfield. We've now seen them do horror and subgenres within that. I think they could do some kind of period piece, playing on the different musical genres of that time, which we've seen a bit in VHS Christmas Carol, which is set in the 80s. But they could go back even further, maybe play on the golden age of musicals or something like that. There's a lot of possibilities. I'd love to hear your thoughts, obviously what you thought of the show, but also what you'd like to see from Starkid in the future. Make sure to check out my other Nerdy Prudes Must Die videos, and please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Thanks for watching. Bye!